Lights out, sucker punch back down. Call love, we wrote it, then I wiped out. Two chicks just passing in the night now. Offshore, looking for a lighthouse. Great deal, you said that it was painless. Down and out, drowning in the sea of my anguish. Honey, you always said hope flows comprehended, but I can't cope. So I gotta find my way back to you, baby. Tryna find my way back to you, baby. Gotta find my way back to you, to us, to love.
What's up, everybody, man? It's Uncle P, man. I'm about to introduce you to my family, right? Pearson Koutcher Law, right? Workers' comp, it's all they do, man. They've been doing it for years. You know, their family, your family, we're family. Let's sit down and have this conversation. They have Bethann Kagan from Shein Law here to talk about mesothelioma, asbestos. So let's listen to them, man. If you have any family members that are suffering or have suffered from this, right? Hit up Shein Law, man. But we're going to sit down. We're going to introduce Eric Pearson.
Uncle P.
And John. What's going on, fellas? How we feeling?
Hey. Great. How are you?
I'm good. No complaints, man. No complaints at all. You know, this COVID has really knocked everything upside down and trying to figure all that stuff out. So, you know, I'm good. How y'all making out up there?
Good. We are we're going strong. We are excited to be here for our monthly shout to everyone, and we've seen a little bit of a tick up in business, so that must mean that people are getting back to work, which is a good sign.
Right.
You know, but it's still important for everyone to know out there that they have rights no matter when it happens. And that they have to be really careful with how they protect themselves as they do get back to work. But everything's moving as best as can be.
All right. Well, you know, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm going to dip off and let y'all talk and do everything y'all have to do. I'm in here working. You know, I got a job now. So, you know, I got to work. But I appreciate y'all, as always, man. Family, listen, man. Listen to these guys, man. They know exactly what they're talking about. Hit them up if you have any workers' compensation claims, and let them talk to you, man. Talk to them. I'm out of here.
Thanks, Uncle P.
All right, see you, P.
So, Jay, just us now.
It's just us, old school.
It's it. So this is like letting people see our Monday morning couches talks after a long weekend.
Yep, I have my coffee. I'm ready to go today.
So what we thought might be a good idea when I was talking to Uncle P before we introduce everyone to Bethann, is throw out our information again so that people can protect themselves, and make sure that they understand the power that they do have, unfortunately, if they get hurt at work. So, you know, as I was saying, we've certainly seen an increase in at least contacts and calls. So I think people are back to work a little bit stronger than before. What do you think you would tell someone most importantly upon their returning to work? You know, if something happened to them, like an injury or something.
Yeah, I don't think anything has changed. It's the message, Eric, that we give all our clients, and that's to immediately report the accident, check on your symptoms, and if you need medical treatment, get it. There's no delay that is acceptable in any circumstance. If you're injured, you can get medical treatment at an urgent care. Some companies have on-site clinics. You can go to an emergency room, and you do that without delay. And then, you know, what we always say is call us. You can have our cell phones. We have a presence on the web, because our mantra, especially on this show, is knowledge is power. Knowledge is king. And that allows you to make an informed decision. So despite COVID, despite anything else that has turned this world upside down, with respect to workers' comp, things are still the same. If you get hurt, you tell your boss, you tell your supervisor, you get treatment, and you call us, and let's figure out a plan. Let's figure out a way to help you, not in our best interest, but what's in your best interest.
And our listeners out there should know that we have access to some great medical providers, people that we've actually sent our family members to, or that you and I have had to go to, being 16-year-old Olympic style athletes that we are at our time right now. But we literally use providers that we, again, consider, sending our own family to. John, with people still working at home, are they still protected by the workers' comp laws?
Yeah, Eric, that's a great question. So because of COVID, people are working from home, they're working remotely, and there's been sort of a sea change where traditional workplaces have been changed. So if you're hurt at work and you are performing activities that further the employer's interest. So in other words, you can't be doing laundry at the time in your house and slip and fall and get get injured and think that that's going to be a workers' compensation case. But let's say you're at your desk and you get up from your desk because you're working for your employer at home and you trip and fall. Or you're upstairs and you remember you left something you needed for work downstairs and you fall down the steps. Whatever the scenario may be, as long as we can relate it to your work activities, just because you got hurt at home doesn't mean you don't have a workers' compensation case. And in fact, Eric, we've had some cases where people have been hurt at home because they're working remotely due to COVID. So I think that's something that we're going to see a lot of. And as workplaces become more remote, the traditional workspaces are being redefined.
Yeah. And I think something that makes us different from other attorneys that might dip their foot in a workers' comp case once in a while, besides us only handling work injuries, which is unique in and of itself. We offer a service that I don't even know any that do, and that's confirming information that people might be told without even opening a file or bringing a claim or with no fee attached to it. It's simply people are told certain things that unfortunately are told to them maybe not in their best interest, well, definitely not in their best interest of their employer and insurance company. And we're a resource that we give that advice and help them through it. So I think that's an important thing that listeners need to know, that it's not always if you have questions and an issue or a problem. It's just also to just make sure that everything's being done correctly.
Yeah, that's right. Look, obviously, we are attorneys that have a business, and everybody needs to earn a living regardless of what they do. But part of what we do is a service. And you and I, when we started this firm, we always said we're going to give back and we'll have community involvement. And I think an extension of that is when we talk to people and we help people and we give them advice. They may not necessarily wind up being clients, but they become part of our network, part of our family. And you and I have had a lot of success and received a lot of gratitude by simply telling somebody what the right thing to do is. We'll tell people to go back to work if that's the right thing for them and their family. We'll tell people to treat with the employer's doctor if that's the right thing for their case. There's nothing that you and I will do that will jeopardize somebody's well-being. So even if it's just confirming what they already know, sometimes that's what people need so they can get back to work, so they can take positive steps forward. But you're absolutely right. There is a service that we perform, and we'll continue to do that for everybody out there in the greater Philadelphia region.
And that's even if people are getting their benefits already. If they, hey, I'm getting paid, so there's no problem. They're letting me get my medical treatment. Everything seems great. We'll monitor their file for absolutely no fee or cost, so that they have someone on their side providing information, um, so that they understand, like you said, knowledge is power, that they understand what their power is, what their options are, what their responsibilities. Have someone answer their questions and look out for their best benefit, and not for an insurance company's, which is to minimize claims, or an employer, which is to kind of get rid of issues, that sort of thing. So, and part of that, John, as you know, is we get a lot of phone calls, from people that might not have been, particularly specifically injured at work, but have an injury or a condition, that requires help, and someone to represent them, and give them information about that particular subject. Like we did bringing Adam Taylor with Social Security Disability last month. And today, I think we're both really excited to have Bethann Kagan on. I know that you've worked with her, some overlap with workers' comp claims and her mesothelioma and lung cancer cases. So we thought it would be a great idea to bring her in today. Can you explain a little bit about the overlap, and then maybe we can bring her in and we can bombard her with a million questions.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific segue. So when you and I decided to open our own firm, it was very, very important for both of us that we focus our practice only on workers' compensation. You and I believe firmly that we know what we know, and we know it well, but we're also, we don't have egos so big that we're not afraid to admit that we don't know what we don't know. And, we want to be specialists in our area of law, just like there are specialists in areas of medicine. And we help people, and we do it well, who are injured at work. Other types of cases come to us because of who we are, who we know. We've been doing this a long time. And what we have tried to do is build a network that can help our existing client base and future clients with other areas of law, some of which touch upon workers' compensation and some of which don't. And one of the things that we've seen over the years is that because of the conditions that people work in, especially in certain types of industries, and we'll talk about that, people injure their lungs, and they develop these conditions which have spurred specific areas of the legal practice where practitioners are focusing their practice on injured workers and other people who are exposed to asbestos over the years. Now, asbestos is one of those things that maybe a more recent generation may not be familiar with. But to all our listeners out there, this is an important message.
Very.
This is an amazing guest that we have. She's sort of a superstar in the industry. Her name is Bethann Kagan. She is a litigator. She is a mentor. She is a wonderful attorney, and she focuses her practice on people who are exposed to asbestos and other types of really awful, toxic, hazardous things in the workplace. And she's here with us today, and she's going to tell us some really important things related to your lungs, what you can look out for, and how possibly she can help you. So, Bethann, welcome.
Hey, thank you.
Look at that. Even not at the controls, and John just he said, and it happens.
Yep, it's like
Fine.
Shazam. And Eric, if I could snap my fingers and make you go away, that's my next
you, John. Thank you.
So, hello, Bethann.
Hey, John. Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me.
So welcome to the show. We're really excited to have you. We think that your message is really important to the listeners, and it comes best from someone like you that just handles this area of the law. And, you know, besides being, I want to just mention one other thing for listeners. Besides your being a fantastic litigator and a great firm that only handles this, you know, you're service oriented to the client, just like John and I are. You know, you're there for them. You walk people through whether they become a client or not. But the bedside manner, so to speak, is equal to none. So you know, that's important for us to have viewers understand that we're bringing people that we really feel handle the entirety of the situation. So why don't you just start with a little bit about what you do, and we'll break it down from there.
Sounds good. So again, thanks for having me. I'm bringing a message that is kind of specific, again, related to exposure to asbestos, which, as John said, younger people may not know that much about asbestos, but it's still out there. But the diseases that you can bring a legal action for are specific to the exposure to asbestos that happened a while ago. So while you guys are about work injury that happens when you're working on the job now, a year ago, 5 years ago, the people who get asbestos related diseases, they've been exposed to asbestos 10, 15, even 60 years ago. It takes a long time to develop a disease related to asbestos exposure. And these exposures can happen most of the time on the job, but sometimes it's outside of the job. It could be a hobby. It could be brought home by your parents' clothing. So, you know, if you have a dad that worked at a shipyard or a refinery in certain industries like machinists or maybe steam fitters, boiler makers, they may have brought asbestos home on their clothes, and you may have been exposed as a child. So pretty much anywhere that your dad or your mom worked, you also got what they brought home. So I wanted to talk to you first a little bit about the diseases that are associated with exposure to asbestos. What's known as a signature disease is mesothelioma, and you know it's in a lot of TV ads and things. But what is it? So mesothelioma is a disease of the lining around the lungs, or actually the organs in your belly. So you can develop it most of the time in your chest, but sometimes in your belly. And it is only caused by asbestos. So if a doctor tells you that they even think you might have mesothelioma, you should contact me and contact you guys, because, and you know, as you've said, we've worked together a long time, back and forth, and where your practice ends, mine begins, basically. So the diagnosis of mesothelioma it's a really scary thing. Doctors often say, you know, there's no treatment, but there is treatment. And I do know who in the area treats mesothelioma. It's important to get to a medical provider who's familiar with what is otherwise a pretty rare disease. But it's not so rare in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia area has more mesothelioma than most places in the country due to the industry, the refineries, the shipyards, everything that makes the Philadelphia area so great throughout the last century is what's causing the uptick.
How will someone know if they have mesothelioma? Is there a specific test that a doctor will run, or are there symptoms that they might be experiencing, and they should definitely get it checked? You know, I know I'm kind of getting before the other diagnoses, but
no. Let me address mesothelioma because it's a little bit different. So a lot of times people just say they feel short of breath, and they're short of breath because they overdid it last weekend, or they should lose, 10 or 20 pounds, or I'm just getting older. But a shortness of breath is usually the first symptom. And then sometimes people say they felt like they pulled their back on one side, or their shoulder hurts. It's kind of not a specific thing. You might not see a doctor for it right away, but it's important, especially in light of COVID now, that if you are short of breath, you need to see a medical provider. And if you think you pulled your back and it didn't go away, a lot of medical providers will start correctly by prescribing some antibiotics. Maybe you have a pneumonia or a bronchitis, you're coughing. And that doesn't go away, or if it does, it comes back. And eventually you'll get an x-ray, and the x-ray will show on one side of your chest, you may have some fluid. So not both lungs, one lung. Or they may say you have something called pleural thickening. And most people hear that as I have asbestos in my lungs. So you can't actually see the asbestos, but they see this thickening around your lung. Like if you took a balloon and dipped it in plaster of Paris, any type of plaster material, that white plaster would be, that's actually the mesothelioma. It's not the balloon. It's not your lung itself. So that's how people typically end up getting the beginnings of a diagnosis. But if you know you've been exposed to asbestos in your lifetime, mention it to your medical provider, because it'll help drive them into the right area where these nonspecific symptoms might not mean anything otherwise.
So Bethann, when we talk about asbestos, and from what I understand as a layperson in this field, it's really not used anymore today. But can you explain to the listeners, like, what it was used for, where you would typically have found it, and maybe where they would be exposed to it?
That's a good question. Actually, I think of it as, where was asbestos not used? Asbestos was used in just about everything, actually through the 1980s. And when it comes to things like automotive brakes and clutches and gaskets in automotive vehicles, they actually contained asbestos into the 90s. So it takes a minimum of about 10 to 15 years to develop mesothelioma. So really, we're looking back in time. And what you want to know is what contained asbestos. And the thing is, a lot of things that contained asbestos, no one knew what was in it. So you may have been exposed and you didn't know it. And that's where I can be really helpful. So there's obvious things like pipe insulation and insulation around boilers, for instance. Everyone called it asbestos. It was raw asbestos. But there are all these other ways that asbestos was used. Everything from handles on pots that you use back, those black pot handles back in the 70s and 80s, even up to today. Any electrical equipment, anything that dealt with pumps or valves. If anybody worked with machinery, especially, we see a lot of people that work in the HVAC industry. If you worked with heating, if you worked in plumbing, and if you worked in construction, joint compounds contained asbestos. Anything that would relate to a boiler or a furnace contained asbestos. But even dentists get exposed to asbestos. When they used to make their own fillings in dental school, that was asbestos that they were using. So I always think of it as, what didn't contain asbestos? It's really hard to find.
Yeah. Now, what happens, people get the meso diagnosis. We know that, as you said, can only be from asbestos exposure. And with such a tough diagnosis, they should contact you. I know you were about to say some other conditions. I know that lung cancer is a big one.
So let me address lung cancer. So when you go to a doctor, if you're diagnosed with lung cancer, they ask one question: did you smoke?
Right.
And that's the beginning. But I always, I think medical providers should inquire a little more and ask, did you work with asbestos? Because if you develop lung cancer and you were exposed to asbestos, if you developed lung cancer and smoked, you had a risk of developing the disease. But if you develop lung cancer, smoked, and were exposed to asbestos, you have almost double the chance of developing that lung cancer. So I like to see people that smoke who develop lung cancer and are exposed to asbestos, because a lot of times they're benign markers in your lungs. So non-cancerous markers that show up that say you've been exposed to a ton of asbestos. It doesn't really matter that you smoked. You developed in part the lung cancer because you were also exposed to asbestos. So, doctors often don't ask that second question: what'd you do for a living? Did you work with asbestos? And so it's important to note that second question needs to be asked. And if you should bring it up, you have to be your own advocate.
And again, just so everyone's clear, because I know when John and I speak at groups, or when we used to speak at groups, and we would talk about what you handle, immediately hands went up, but I'm a smoker, so it must exclude me. I don't have a claim because I smoked for 30 years. I hear about all the non-filtered cigarettes that people used to smoke. So even if that's true, if there was exposure to asbestos, there is a possible claim and compensation which I think is the next thing you should explain is what you go for. But that's still an opportunity, and it shouldn't just because someone smoked they shouldn't just not pick up a phone.
Absolutely. And I'm always
Okay.
happy to answer any questions. I mean, an example is I had a lot of calls from people that had been in some connection to the Philadelphia school district and the different schools in the suburbs as well. So like in Delaware County, a lot of the schools contained asbestos. And you know, if someone has a kindergartner, they're not going to be exposed to asbestos in a way that's going to cause disease. But I still spoke with every family because they have legitimate concerns. And the news, it's good, but it doesn't always give the full story. So the first thing is there's no question that's not important. So if you do develop lung cancer, I'd be happy to kind of flesh it out and see if there was some exposure to asbestos in your lifetime. Because again, you might not know you were exposed. That's
Right.
where I come in. I have 30 years of experience in how people are exposed to asbestos. And inevitably, there's always a bigger exposure than someone might think in the beginning.
Yeah, Bethann, I want to ask you this because this part of your practice always intrigues me, because it's sort of like putting pieces of a puzzle together. And I remember at one of your presentations, one of the questions came up as to how would I possibly know where in the course of my life I was exposed and what product and what
Right.
manufacturer. And I remember you just started taking out photo after photo after photo. And can you explain that to the listeners, that if maybe they're thinking it would be impossible for me to trace, we hear that word today, tracing, to trace back to where I became exposed. How do you do that?
So everything I do is something that happened 30, 40, 50 years ago. And people, their memories are actually very good long-term. They were fresh. When you ask someone what they did, if they did it in a job every day, they can come out and tell you exactly what they did and what they used. We don't remember to get milk at the supermarket because that's short-term memory and that's bad. But we go on a walk down memory lane and we go through everything: jobs, hobbies, what your parents did, where you lived. Sometimes your neighborhood just spewed asbestos around you and you wouldn't know it. But I have the experience of knowing the workplaces, the products. I know the products that contain asbestos, but you may not. So we start to have a back and forth. And when I was speaking that time and I was starting to show some of the products that contain asbestos, people couldn't believe it. Everyone was raising their hands. So there's a lot more exposure to asbestos than people think. And that's where I come in. I'm actually called kind of like a boring date. My husband was real interesting because if anyone mentions a boiler or a valve, I get all excited. But, you know, it's what I do. And it's been my passion for decades. And so I love speaking to people about what they did for a living. I want to know what their hobbies were. So sometimes, for instance, back in the 60s and 70s, someone who worked on cars a lot as a hobby, they were called motorheads. And it wasn't what they did for a living, but it was their hobby. And so on weekends, they would drag race, they would race on tracks, they would fix cars, they would fix up cars and take them apart and put them back together. They were exposed to a ton of asbestos. So when someone in today's age it develops mesothelioma, I got to go back and ask them when they were kids what they were doing. So that's the kind of thing that I engage in. Even if a person's not sick and wants to know if they've been exposed to asbestos, I talk to them on the phone. I answer emails all the time because everyone deserves an ear to see if they have something to worry about. And mesothelioma itself is a rare disease. So I tell people don't lose sleep over it, but just be aware and inform your medical providers. Lung cancer, if you smoke, you need to be monitored. If you didn't smoke and were exposed to asbestos, you need to be monitored. But to know you're exposed to asbestos, you might need to talk to me in the first place.
And when they do call, and when they speak to you, what actually are the services that you're providing for them?
So the first thing I do is I help someone, even if they're not sick, elicit their asbestos exposure. And I send them an email so that we can document all of their asbestos exposure should they ever get sick. So by speaking with me, we start to at least make a trail of who your coworkers were, write some names down, what you did and what you were exposed to. I also can help if I'm not a medical provider, I'm a lawyer, but I know who in the area does treat mesothelioma and lung cancer. And I never pick anybody as like my favorite, but I certainly know who's treating all around. If you're at this hospital system, I maybe can help direct you to the medical providers there I know do treat these diseases. And And, I think giving someone a roadmap of their past. So let's say I'm a dad, I worked with asbestos. I passed from a heart attack at some point, but my kid gets asbestos, my adult child. There's going to be a document that says what I was exposed to. So it's important to make that roadmap and to be able to, have something, and that I can help them with that.
How long do?
Yeah,
Oh,
let me ask a
Yep.
quick question, because some of the listeners may want to know this. Maybe you can separate fact from fiction. There have been some commercials, dollar signs are talked about. There are certain funds of compensation for people who develop mesothelioma. Perhaps some of the companies went bankrupt. What's the structure that's been set up to compensate people who are injured by this awful product?
So it's interesting. You probably do see a lot of ads. And a lot of these ads are not for lawyers that are local to the Philadelphia area. They don't know the work sites. They don't know the products that were used here, and they don't know what you did. So the first thing is you want to know what was the Philadelphia area looking like. Then you were saying the the ads.
Yeah, the monetary numbers, the
numbers
funds that have been set up.
That's the first question I'm usually asked. So there is a commercial out there that says there are billions of dollars available. And those billions of dollars, which I don't know are billions, are accumulation of bankrupt companies that were made by the courts to put money in an account to compensate victims, and I put compensating quotes, if they get a disease. So this is for everyone in the world who develops the disease. And what you get is literally a penny or 3 cents on the dollar. So it's not a lot of compensation, but if you take the world at large who develops asbestos-related diseases, it's a little bit of a misrepresentation. There's not billions of dollars for any one person, but what there are a lot of viable companies that are not bankrupt, who are responsible for your disease. And what's really important here, and I mean, I can't say I like all lawyers, but this is one of the reasons I do what what the asbestos litigation is, that mesothelioma, and in a lot of instances, lung cancer, these were preventable diseases. The companies that made the products knew that these products that contained asbestos were going to kill. And they knew that people were going to get sick, but they profited hugely. And I have all that evidence. I know that, back in the early 1900s, it was very knowable that people exposed to asbestos without breathing protection were going to get sick. They needed a warning. The manufacturers needed to give warnings. Don't inhale this dust. Can cause cancer. And they didn't. So what I know, and there's a lot of local companies. So if I'm a firm that's in California, St. Louis, or New York, they're not going to know the local suppliers of the products that contained asbestos. They're not going to know whose products were at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, were at Sun Ship, Sun Oil, any of the steel mills. I know who supplied here. I have the records. So there's a real lawsuit to be had. What you see on TV, you're hearing about bankrupt funds. They're there for people, but they're pretty minimal compared to if you have one of these diseases, the potential for a lawsuit going into a courtroom.
And these claims that potentially could be brought for mesothelioma diagnoses or lung cancer, they can potentially be, I don't want to say lucrative, but there is a significant asset potentially available for these diagnoses, not just with bankrupt claims?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, you have to wonder why firms from outside of Philadelphia are advertising here. They're extremely large recoveries to be had. I help figure out how you're exposed to asbestos. You tell me how you're exposed. These are some of the largest corporations in the world that are responsible to you. And, the recovery can be very, very large. You can actually provide for your family, your kids, and your grandkids for many generations to come. You should never have gotten these diseases, either mesothelioma or lung cancer. But if you do, you can really take care of your family. And not every cancer has a cause that you know of. So if someone gets breast cancer, you don't know always, what caused it. But if you get mesothelioma, we know exactly what caused it. The question isn't, were you exposed to asbestos? It's how were you exposed to asbestos?
Sure. Yeah, I'm sorry, Eric. I'm monopolizing Bethann here.
No, John, that's okay. I'm quite used to this.
Bethann, the greater Chester area is really important to Eric and I. We started our practice in Delaware County. We've represented many, many people and generations of families in Chester. We like the grit of Chester. We like how through thick and thin, they always find a way to survive. A lot of good, hardworking people in Chester. But what is it about that area relative to asbestos exposure? Give the listeners an idea of why so many people down in that area are exposed. And are there any companies that you see over the years that may jog someone's memory?
Sure. So Delaware County has potentially the largest population of people that worked with their hands, worked with tools. And over the last 30 years, I've seen more people who either lived and or worked in Delaware County or right off Delaware County into the Philadelphia County or a little Montgomery County and Chester County, and then over the bridge sometimes in South Jersey. There are kind of the usual suspects of work sites where we see more cases of mesothelioma and lung cancer than a lot of other locations in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. So first of all, you have Sun Shipbuilding, which is in Marcus Hook, and there was an old shipbuilding entity called Cramp. But a lot of people in Delco, they worked at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard too. So these shipyards were just laden with asbestos through the 90s. Then you have the refineries. So you have Atlantic, you have Sun Oils, which was Sinclair and BP. It's now, I believe, owned by Delta. That refinery is just, I can't even tell you how many clients I've had that have worked there in any trade. Sometimes people were just inspectors. They didn't even work with their hands, but they were at the site. Allied Chemicals, another, any of the DuPont facilities. So down in Claymont, over in South Jersey, and Chambers Works, there's a couple others. The DuPont facilities are places where we see a lot of people that are developing asbestos diseases out of there. Certainly Westinghouse in Essington, or Leicester, it was Leicester, American Viscose, Baldwin Locomotive, Allied Chemical. Pretty much if it was an industrial or heavy commercial site, you were exposed to asbestos. And then in addition to that, this is not scientific, but I see more auto mechanics and people that worked in the auto mechanical fields out of Delaware County than just about any other county around here. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but whether it's a gas station on a corner that had 2 service bays, or you worked for a manufacturer, or a large professional auto mechanic situation, people that worked with automobiles and even farm equipment, they are heavily exposed to asbestos. And unfortunately, auto mechanics were exposed to asbestos straight through the 90s, never warned. So these are our usual suspects.
And before John asks another question, I'd like to jump in. What if, because we know your main office is in Philadelphia, but you mentioned employers over the border, into Jersey, into Delaware. Are those listeners that worked in those states still able to contact you for information?
Absolutely. In fact, usually their cases can be brought in Pennsylvania. Okay. So if you lived in Pennsylvania, you can bring a case in Pennsylvania. So the fact that they didn't work, and by the way, not only did people work in Delaware and South Jersey, but a lot of times working out of unions, which was something really, really prevalent, still is, but union populations have dwindled over the years a little bit. The nature of union work is that you didn't work at just one place. Right. You worked at every one of these work sites. You were a steam fitter out of 690 or 420, every work site. So there may be people listening who said, I worked at all of those work sites. I worked at other refineries. So a lot of times it's not just one. You see a person who's injured at one place, one work site where they happen to be working when they're injured. I see people who may have worked at 100 different places.
And is there a time period that they have to act upon, like what we would consider a statute of limitations?
Yes. So you have 2 years from your diagnosis, whether you currently live in Delaware County, anywhere in Pennsylvania, in New Jersey, or in Delaware. You have 2 years from your diagnosis to bring a legal action. And it's really important. I think it should go on everyone's driver's license because no one tells you that. So you're diagnosed and you don't know. Sometimes people call me and they say, oh, I know that disease. My dad died of it 15 years ago.
Right.
And there's nothing I can do at that point. So if you are diagnosed, if you even think you might have a mesothelioma or lung cancer, you go to an urgent care, you think you have COVID, they say, we see a spot on your lung or you have fluid on your lung. You want to immediately see, am I sick, number one? And if I am, do I have a legal action? Because we only have 2 years to file that suit for you.
And speaking of the x-rays, and we had brought up, obviously everyone's living through this pandemic together right now. John and I have discussed how it's affected the workers' comp practice. But specifically, has there been any effect on your practice, whether or not it's people feeling sick and hearing something they kind of didn't want to hear, or are the courts still moving forward? A little bit about that.
We've actually seen a really big uptick in the diagnosis of mesothelioma and lung cancer since March. And people keep telling me when they call me, I thought I had COVID. I went to get tested. I went to a medical provider. I went to an urgent care. I went to the ER, and I got this diagnosis. So while a lot of I know that there's been kind of a downward trend on routine screenings like colonoscopies and mammograms, because COVID it's a breathing illness. People are actually thinking they have COVID and are ending up with actually a much more serious diagnosis. But the earlier, I look at it this way, the earlier you're caught, the better your opportunity is for medical treatment. But because of that, we've seen a really big uptick in the diagnosis of lung cancer and mesothelioma. I've been on the road and busy, wearing a mask and social distancing.
No, that's good. Bethann, I guess before we conclude, I always remembered you telling me that holiday times when families get together, maybe not in times of COVID, but perhaps Zoom meetings, family gatherings were coming up on Thanksgiving and, Christmas and Kwanzaa and Hanukkah. Why is that a time when you typically see an uptick in people thinking that they were exposed to asbestos?
So what happens is that when families get together, and I know that a lot of families have tried to stay kind of within each other's posse to stay together right now, so they can at least see grandma and their parents. So they get together at the Jersey Shore, they get together, in the Poconos, they get together, having a picnic in the backyard. And then that starts in the summers usually. And it carries into the Thanksgiving holiday, it carries into Christmas, and it carries into New Year's. We see more diagnoses of mesothelioma and lung cancer between the summer and about February of the following year because pop doesn't look so good. And so when you talk on the phone and your mother says, Dad's slowing down. Well, he's older, so of course he is. But when you actually see somebody in person, you say, just something doesn't seem right. So it's the cumulative family togetherness. And I think this is maybe helping with the COVID situation as well, is getting pop to the hospital or mom. Women do get mesothelioma and lung cancer from asbestos as well. So it's the togetherness where something, an adult child typically pushes a little bit harder to get one of their parents to a doctor. And that's why we see more diagnoses, it seems, in October, and then between Thanksgiving and right after New Year's. I can't tell you how many clients have been in the hospital over Christmas because they were getting a biopsy to see what was going on.
Yeah.
This is all real tough stuff, but it's important that people understand what goes into it and how to look for it. And again, like John and I have always said, you need to know to be powerful so you can at least make decisions and have options. And so I think the information you gave is spot on to our listeners. It's not anything that we wish upon anyone, obviously, and hope that there are no claims, but we know the reality of it, and we want our listeners to have someone that they can have faith in, and know that they're getting good guidance and good counsel. So thank you for providing that to our listeners today. It was
Thank you.
very, very helpful.
Bethann, how would you want someone to reach out to you, to follow up with you? What's the best thing for them to do?
Well, they could reach out to either of you guys. First of all, I can give my phone number, and it actually goes right to my cell phone now, and I answer it 24 hours a day unless the ringer's off, and I get right back to you. So my office number is 215-735-8870, or you can go to my law firm website, and it's Shein Law, SHEIN law.com. There's also a lot of information on the website about the diseases, about providers, to see if you think you might have the disease, and certainly call Bethann and I will help him out.
Yep, and Uncle P just put up your direct email address so the listeners can reach out that way.
There's usually like a 5-minute turnaround,
right.
So unless it's the middle of the night, I'll be right back to you. I always get back to people within 24 hours, if not shorter.
Perfect. So now we're going to see really if John can finish out the call, the conference as strong as he started, and see if he can bring Uncle P back without anything but just thinking it.
Hey, there I go.
Boom.
Buddy, I'm on a roll.
Yes, you are.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You are absolutely on the road, man. Listen, Bethann, with mesothelioma, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they you can because I got a question and it was text to me, but I'm trying to word it properly, right? With respect to the dead. If they pass away from it and their family calls you and says, my uncle died of mesothelioma, can you go back and test that or go back?
That's a great question, Uncle P. So a lot of times in any given year, someone will call me and say, my husband died 6 months ago, dad died a year ago. And we can absolutely bring that suit. And that's a great question. So if you're within the period of time that we can bring a legal action, it doesn't matter if someone has already passed away and you're just learning about the ability to bring a legal action now. So I can absolutely help that person.
Okay. Awesome.
And
that was the only question that
I think also, Uncle P, it's important that they contact Bethann because there's other people that might have been exposed to that person that they might want to now follow and make sure that they, hopefully didn't get it from someone bringing it in. So I think that's important. And then, Uncle P, we had gotten a question from Dante.
Yes, you did.
About something that there you go. And the answer, the straight answer is you file it against the workers' comp carrier.
Mm-hmm.
If you are at home and you are working and that's where you're doing, furthering your employer's business and you are injured, then you have a workers' comp claim. You're going to have zero out-of-pocket cost for any medical treatment that you need for those injuries. And, you qualify for a wage loss benefit.
Yeah, and Bethann, along those lines, any fee that you charge people just for a consultation, do they have to worry about expenses, anything like that?
No, actually, I work on what's called a contingent fee. So you will not owe me any money unless I recover for you. I front all costs, and anything that's recovered, I recoup those costs later. So, if I'm bringing a case for you, I feel pretty strongly about it. And so that's a really good question, John, because sometimes people think that, lawyers charge by the hour, and I don't. And I spend a ton of time. And actually, one last thing is I make house calls. So I really appreciate that people who have lung cancer and mesothelioma are sick, and I come to you. So you'll never have to come to my office unless you have a burning desire to come to Broad Street, because I spend most of my days with people outside their homes or inside their homes, whatever they're comfortable with. And that's how I get to know them. So you never have to come to me.
Great.
Awesome. Well, that's the show, man. I want to thank our guest, Bethann Kagan, from Shein Law for stopping through and discussing mesothelioma, right? And
Yep.
how
Thanks for having me.
absolutely, absolutely. And listen, man, this is Pearson Koutcher Law, right? Workers' comp is all they do. They do this once a month, and we're trying to get to two. We're trying to get to every 2 weeks, but we'll keep working on that. And listen, they're bringing in lawyers from all around, right, to talk to our audience. So share this live. Make sure you share this. Make sure you tell your family, your friends, man. Listen to the Pearson Koutcher Law Hour, man. It's important. It's imperative. John, Eric, anything you guys got to say before we roll out?
We appreciate it. Yeah, we as always we do. Thanks for welcoming us to your family, and we welcome you to ours. And together we're stronger. We appreciate the message. Stay well, stay safe.
Absolutely. Eric?
Perfect. I can't be. That's perfect. As much as it
Perfect.
hurts me to say, he got it. He nailed it. It's perfect.
Nailed it. He nailed it. All right. Well, we'll catch y'all next month.
Thank you.
I don't know when, but we'll definitely talk about it. And be safe.
Great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bethann.
Listen, man, that was an important show. Bethann Kagan, right? Shein Law, mesothelioma, all of it, man. It was awesome. Pearson Koutcher Law, man. They do their job, man. They definitely do their job. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, man. It's Uncle P. I'm in the old room. I know y'all remember the old room, right? Got the walls. Leslie in here making shirts, man. We're doing it. We're working, man. Stay safe. And remember, Uncle P loves you. Peace.